This is Dixon Creek on the 4-6 Ranch, Carson County, the Texas Panhandle. 100 years ago, the first oil well in the Texas Panhandle was drilled right here. My grandfather, George H. Pratt, obtained a lease on behalf of Gulf Production Company from Captain S.G. Burnett. This well was drilled and things kicked off the Great Panhandle Oil Field. What follows, in his own words, from a dedication he made of the historical marker in 1971 when he was nearly 80 years old, you'll find out how he spent the longest 2 weeks, which wound up to be nearly 45 years, with Gulf Production Company. I think you will find his story fascinating.
The longest 2 weeks. In July 1919, the writer was sent from Gulf Work Office to the Panhandle for 2 weeks or so as scout. This hitch finally ended November 1957 when retirement met him head-on after almost 43 years of continuous Gulf service. Prospecting for oil or gas was limited at that time to the Emerald Oil Company, later to become an important part of the Pioneer Natural Gas Company. This company, composed of the Nobles brothers and others, was in the process of completion of a small gas well located on the Madison Ranch north of the Canadian River and in Potter County. The test was drilled following an extensive geological survey by Dr. Charles Gould of Oklahoma. It brought on a wave of wildcatting extending into many panhandle counties. At the close of World War I, considerable risk money was available, and the success had by many in range of Burnett and elsewhere prompted the move to Virgin Territory. None of the wildcats drilled then were productive, and many were promoted simply because the land and money happened to be available. Many starts were promoted by responsible concerns, but we did have our fair share of fly-by-nights and lightning rod salesmen. During the windy spring months, several of the light wooden rigs blew down, and, as a consequence, the companies blew up. The gas discovery in Potter County prompted many majors and others to station scouts, geologists, and landmen in the area. E.S. Blaisdell, former mayor of Amarillo and a grain dealer and associate, secured from Captain S.B. Burnett a very large oil and gas lease on his 4-6 Ranch in Carson County, and interested Gulf, then known as Gulf Production Company, in a sizable drilling block. After an extensive geological survey, location was made for number 1 Burnett in section 118, block 5, ING and Railway Company survey, and on August 24, 1920, gauged in the 50 million cubic feet of gas at 2411 feet in line. After deepening to 3225 feet, was plugged back to 2760 feet and shut in for 75 million cubic feet. This was followed by Gulf's number 2 Burnett on section 106, same block and survey, and on April 5, 1921, was completed as the Panhandle's first commercial oil well, pumping 204 barrels per day from Granite Wash Formation, 3047 to 52 feet. on its golden anniversary date, was still pumping a few barrels daily. The finding of oil kicked off things and caused much activity on the 4-6s and in many of the Panhandle counties, especially Hutchinson, Gray, and Wheeler counties. At that time, all drilling was by cable tools, assisted by the consumption of copious quantities of mail pouch and beech nut by the crews and others of us, as smoking where there might be gas was not conducive to a long life. As Ranger and other areas were cooling off, many drilling contractors, rig builders, and teaming and truck firms moved in. The area north of Canadian River in Hutchinson County was considered promising, and Gulf's No. 1 CL Dial and others in Section 90, Block Z, GC and SF Railway Company Survey found oil and lime at 3065 to 75 feet, and on June 10, 1922, tested for 135 barrels per day pumping, deepened to 3086 feet, increased production by 79 barrels. This discovery, plus the activity in the present Borger area, really started the ball rolling. In September 1922, Willis, Lewis, and Trigg moved in the first string of rotary tools from Tonkawa, Oklahoma. It is interesting to note that these tools, 3 flat cars of them, lay on the siding at Panhandle for weeks. Due to continued rains and muddy roads, it was impossible to unload and move to the location, which was on the Burnett Ranch, and drilled for Silk, Bullington, and Clark, and was completed on December 8, 1922, for 200 barrels per day from Granite Wash at 3070 to 76 feet. The successful use of rotor tools out here meant that sundown was fast approaching for cable tools. One of the very early Wildcats was drilled by Lennox and Hatter on the Lanaken Ranch in Oldham County and was at that time the farthest west Panhandle testing. The hole was dry at 3511 and was drilled by Bill Stowe with cable tools. When scouting this rig one early winter day, just as we were leaving the rig, snow started falling. We were headed for Santa Fe, but this changed our minds and Alabama became our objective. About 3 miles from the rig and not yet on the highway, the old open-faced Dodge stopped. Upon examination, we found that the gasoline tank had fallen off. That meant a walk back of around 2 miles. Luck was with us, as the tank was found right side up and no gas lost. By making slings of our belts and my partner's necktie, the thing was finally manhandled to the car, laid on the front floorboards, the gasoline line brought into the tank, and after a few turns of the starter, she fired up. In the very early days, the area was infested by a flood of doodlebuggers. Each claimed to have a surefire method of locating oil or gas. One such character claimed that he could, by walking barefoot, feel the vibration set up by oil or gas. The time we saw him, he did not demonstrate as the ground was snow-covered. He did no barefoot walking. I do not think any of us ever met one of these fellows who became rich by reason of his oil-finding dingus. Of interest was a wildcat in Randall County, located bottom of the Paladura Canyon. Evidently the thought was that many feet of hole and pipe could be saved, as the location of Paladura Oil Company's No. 1 Arnold was around 600 or 700 feet below the canyon rim. Getting the rig and material down to the location was a task, as the owner road was a sort of a wagon track which could, with care, be negotiated by a team. We scouts soon learned the better plan was to leave our car on the rim and walk down. From this, you may be assured the hole wasn't scouted too often. It was abandoned as dry on October 11, 1920, at a depth of 2,750 feet. The Canadian River was one of our problems, as there were only 2 bridges, one north of Amarillo and the other at Canadian and Hemphill County. This made travel and hauling very difficult. The river could be forded, but was a hazardous undertaking. This some of us found out the hard way, as quicksand or deep water could really foul things up. As the city of Clemens, the original county seat of Hutchinson County, it was necessary to go from Amarillo north to Dumas and Moore County, and east over pasture roads well trapped with numerous wire gates or letdowns. Spending a night in Clemens was not a very pleasant prospect, although the one hotel and or boarding house did have fair beds and good meals. There were no telephones, lights, or other conveniences. I think the only telephone in Hudson County then was on the Weatherly Ranch well south of the river. If your car broke down, not infrequent in those days, you were probably the only mechanic available. We soon learned to stock up with canned goods, carry 2 mounted spare tires, extra tubes, and patching material, a good jack, mud chains, tow chains, shovel, extra oil, gas, and water. On looking back, it was rugged, but we were young enough and probably dumb enough to enjoy every snowy, muddy, and or dusty mile. Many lasting friendships were made during our ramblings over the country. Some ducks, geese, and quail were shot and fish caught, and many good meals eaten at farm and ranch houses. Most hotels were then, as we knew them, bowl and pitcher, with one small towel and a cake of waterproof soap. However, don't get the idea there were no good hotels, as we had the Amarillo at Amarillo and at Pampa the Snyder, and we look back with fond memory to the good beds and excellent meals served by Alec and his father. We would drive miles out of our way to make Pampa for a night and meal. Another good one was at McLean, as the beds were good and the meals ditto, but the proprietor had a bad habit of stationing himself down in the lobby at, to us, an ungodly hour, and singing out, "Breakfast, breakfast, come and get it." Fearing that he might throw it out, we heeded his call. The area's first oil refiner was built by Reese Allen and Associates of Wichita Falls and was located on the northeastern edge of Amarillo. Gasoline, kerosene, and fuel oil only were produced. After passing through several hands, the plant became the property of the Texas Company and has since grown into a modern and efficient plant served by pipe and rail lines. The reader must realize that transportation was a real problem during the early days, as everything used in drilling, building, construction, food, and whatnot was, weather permitting, teamed or trucked from Panhandle, which then became one of the Santa Fe's busiest points. Usually supplies for operations north of the river came by rail to Spearman and then by team or truck. In all, this was a fantastic job of hauling, and observant ones were able, without too much trouble, to add to their vocabulary some choice mule skinner observations. These fellows were always willing to snake your car out of a mud hole. The cost varied, but it was generally understood you did the getting out and making the tow hookup, as Skinner generally took a dim view of wet feet. The completion of the Santa Fe's rail line north from Panhandle removed most of the transportation misery. Many tall tales have been told and written about big old bad Bolivar. Many of them probably true, but to those of us who are graduates of other boom spots, it was old stuff. Law and order finally came to the area when a troop of Texas National Guardsmen was sent in, and, like other boom areas, when pumping equipment moved in, the ladies of love and their followers folded their tents and took off. It was said many of them walked out. Their passing was not mourned. When natural gas was discovered, few of us could see much use for it except locally, as long lines were not then in the picture and did not appear until better pipelining methods were developed, such as welding. During the early days, fantastic amounts of gas were burned to produce carbon black and pumped into the air from gasoline extraction plants. Later, better and much less wasteful ways were found by which to produce these two very useful products. An estimate of the amount of gas used in these early day plants would make our national debt look like peanuts. The writer has been asked to give a few observations as to the field's early days. This he has attempted to do with apologies to all concerned. Now, if you remember those times, then, like Wes Izzard says, you don't have to worry about the draft. Thank you. George Pratt, Jr., Amarillo, June 12, 1971.